if one is going to understand oneself as a learner, the great thing is, we can apply our own awareness or our own, we can reflect on how we ourselves function. So even though awareness is and presence at the heart of how we operate in the world, we can become present to ourselves as people who are present to the world. We have this wonderful way of examining ourselves, which probably animals don't have. And I think it's worth saying that those things, the idea of being present to something, this is where I'm at the moment. I'm present to this and I'm not present to everything else in the world. And the idea of an awareness are two very crucial things. And watching the interplay between the two in one's life is very productive as well. And it was very striking to me when I was thinking about this some years ago, when I realized that very often I'm present to something and an awareness will pop up. I'll notice something about it, and then I'll be present to it in a new way. As a result of having noticed that new thing, the way I'm present to this situation has changed slightly. And that process will continue. It's almost like a back and forth between being present in a particular way, having an awareness, and then my presence, the way I'm present, shifting a bit. And then I started noticing that there are times when I'm present to a situation and no awareness pops up. And that's the situation we talk about when we talk about being puzzled. That's the situation we're in. And puzzlement has interesting dynamics associated. We quite like being puzzled for a while, and then we rather reject being puzzled. After a while, it becomes a bit oppressive, and the tension associated with being puzzled is too much. And I was always, this is just whatever, I was always very struck by the fact that people who create some of the great inventions, the great thought experiments or whatever in human things, we celebrate them. And these people like Isaac Newton or whatever, and they tend to report on it that these problems, things they were puzzled by, stayed with them unresolved for many years until suddenly the result popped into their mind. They work on these problems over many, many years. And I was always struck by the fact that Newton famously had a huge capacity for tolerating physical discomfort in his life. And it seems to me there might be something, because undoubtedly having a problem which you don't let go of, there's a certain discomfort associated with it. And yet being prepared to hold on to problems and let one's mind work on these problems is undoubtedly a very useful way of making progress in any field.
Yes, Catania talked about problems in terms of tension. You have a problem because you have a tension in you, and this tension builds and builds and builds if you have this kind of a problem. And so you can think of Archimedes, for example. So Archimedes had a problem, and that is that the king had a crown and wanted to know whether the goldsmith had made it entirely out of gold or whether he had substituted something else in the gold. And the only way to do this was to be able to find the volume of the crown, and the only way to do that was to melt it down, and then of course you don't have a crown anymore. And so you can imagine Archimedes thinking about this and getting nowhere, and how on earth can I find out what the volume of the crown is? My goodness me. And so he's quite distressed, and there's this tension building and building, because after all, it's the king who said, I want you to do this, I want you to find this out. And so the tension builds and builds and builds. And then I can imagine Archimedes thinking, got to go and have a bath. And so he just, and he steps into the bath. Everything is there for the awareness to take place. And as he steps into the bath, it all comes together. And there we have Eureka. And so, and the release of the tension is reflected in the size of the aha moment. It's an aha moment, right? And this is why Gategno said, Gategno's idea of this was, we call these solutions because the tension is dissolved, right? The tension dissolves, and so we have a solution to the problem. And so his idea of why we call solutions is because we actually dissolve the tensions. And and this is one of the ways you can measure the size of an awareness. It's by the visibility of the solution when it happens. If it's a huge problem, then it's a big aha moment, etc.
I'm aware that we're talking in fairly abstract terms, and I know we should come back to talking about teaching. So just in terms of this idea of being puzzled and having a tension when you don't have a problem and working on it for a period of time, I just want to say one thing which related to when I first came in contact with Gategno's ideas, which is when I was learning Japanese. I went to Japan to teach English. I was in my early 20s, and I came across a Japanese class taught using the silent way, which was Gategno's approach to teaching languages. And one of the most striking things I found about that class, I'd have many striking things, but one of the striking things I found was that the teacher didn't resolve the difficulties we had at the end of each lesson. So I was used to being in a class and we'd attack a problem and then the teacher would give us the solution at the end of the class and we'd go away. We were thinking nothing more about it. But my teacher in this Japanese class, if we were struggling with some aspect of Japanese, she would leave it unresolved at the end of the class. And I thought, this is crazy. I was almost begging her for the answer, but no, she said, we'll work at it again. And of course, these problems stayed with me. I was taking the bus home or whatever. And then suddenly, either I had an awareness later on that evening, or just magically, as a result of sleeping overnight and coming back to class the next day, something got resolved within me. And I think one of the lessons for teaching, which I came out of that, was don't prematurely resolve your students' problems. They're problems which, if they solve, will change themselves and result to them having awareness and making progress. So don't go in there and think at the end of the lesson, we've been working this, I've got to give them the answer now so they go away happy. Leave them with a bit of tension. I'd never realized that there is a word in English actually, which describes a problem which isn't actually in one's conscious mind, but is somehow working its way within oneself, and that is a concern. So you're talking about a concern is something that at some deeper level one has with one as a problem, but it's not actually what one is thinking about at the moment. So leaving students with concerns is fine. That's good teaching.